How are you feeling?
Well,
How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
Eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital.
That's difficult to answer.
this the end? There's a noise inside my head of crying people facing death. Is this the end? Is this the end? Oh, I'm burning in the there's no place to hide. I'm burning in the this is the final time. What have we done to the world? What have we done to the world? I'm burning in a there's no place to hide. I'm burning in a this is the final I don't wanna get married. I don't wanna be just like you. Nobody bothered to ask me. They said I ought to be just like you. Well, I could get a marriage license for a husband and me, so I could use the health insurance for my HART. Since I can file taxes with the same gender spouse, I shouldn't feel so bad getting kicked out of my house. Don't send me a rainbow. Your luck has never done shit for me. Don't want a seat at your table. A fucking invitation to your party. Wanna celebrate a game on your cable TV? We'll trans lesbians of color, sell their bodies stuff to eat. You paid the world for CEOs for shotguns and dicks. Well, all the kids on the street are getting belted with whips. I don't wanna be equal, 'cause I know I'm fucking better than you. Your moderation is lethal. Get on my way, let me do what I need to. There's no protection that this nation's thinking offer to me. Just dollar branches do this is my gay bourgeoisie. So fuck off with your rainbow South American flag. The only colors that I need are the pink and the black.
What up, everyone? Happy Pride Month. Happy Pride Month. Or as it's going to be on my channel, it's going to be Queer Marxism Month. We are doing an entire month of queer Marxist content. Are you guys ready for this? Can you guys handle this? I don't know. I know many of you have been digging into the glorious land of queer with me for a while, but if you're new to my content, this is going to be the month that your mind gets absolutely blown. And we want to welcome back Tom. I got to give Tom a lot of credit. Tom came into Socialism Saturday like a spitfire, and then Tom got yelled at. He went through the hazing ritual, and then Tom came back on Socialism Saturday and started hazing other people almost immediately that were getting wrong answers and being obstinate about it. So Tom, we know, is going to fit right in because Tom went through the entire hazing arc in a single episode of Socialism Saturday, and he came back for more on Monday. That is the spirit. Listen, man. Listen, I've had a couple women, of course they're always women. I've had a couple women in my replies today on various websites who they come in and they comment on my queer stuff and they're like, Karlyn, actually, I think queer is this because the Bible tells me so. And another one was like, actually, Karlyn, do you know that there are only two genders biologically? There are men and women, okay? And I was like, for both of those stupid women, for one of them, I was like, hey, no shit. Do you want to try going and telling a queer activist that, excuse me, sir, did you know there are only two genders biologically? Go do that and see how far that gets you. To the Christian, I was like, listen, I don't give a flying F what your religion is. We hinge into reality here. Do religion in your spirit. You're not bringing your religion into my queer theory class, okay? That's not going to... And the woman was like, oh, you insulting me and my religion? And I was like, no, I mean, I don't give a fuck what your religion is. Just keep it out of the queer theory class. We hinge into reality here, people. We hinge into reality. They are insufferable, aren't they? They really are. They're insufferable. But you know what? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. We are going to be starting off Queer Marxism Month strong. We are going to be starting, and if this sucks, this is Stony Baloney's fault, just so you know. If it's awesome, then it was my idea. If it sucks, then it's Stony Baloney's idea. So this was suggested to me by Stony Baloney. I did crowdsource some queer Marxism content this week. And so, but I actually think that this sounds really, really good. Today, we're going to be starting with a presentation from someone named Lee Edelman. Who's Lee Edelman, you ask? Lee Edelman is a professor currently at Tufts University. And just to be very clear, this is a public website. I'm not doxing anyone's info here. This is on a public website. It's not my fault. Tufts makes their information publicly available on their page. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Don't spam them. Don't dox. I mean, well, the information's on their public page. So I didn't do anything. You like, sometimes people like to report, like, did you guys know this one bitch from the Institute for Research into Male Supremacism conference reported me to YouTube? She was like, you have doxed my private information. I was like, you displayed it in a PowerPoint on video. Like, and YouTube told her to go pound sand, of course. Anyway, Lee Edelman is currently a professor at Tufts University. Research interests: literary theory, especially queer theory, psychoanalysis, and post-structuralism. Ew. Lee Edelman began his academic career as a scholar of 20th century American poetry. Well, figures. He has since become a central figure in the development, dissemination, rethinking of queer theory. His current work explores the intersections of sexuality, rhetorical theory, and cultural politics in film. Now, Lee Edelman wrote a book about 20 years ago that I'm fairly certain Lee Edelman's going to be talking about in this broadcast because it's in the title. Lee Edelman wrote a book called Queer Theory and the Death Drive. What does that sound like to you? What does that sound like to you? Just if you had to guess, based on the comprehensive study of queer Marxism that we do in Counter-Revolutionary Book Club, if I said to you Queer Theory and the Death Drive, what queer theory readings does that bring to mind for you? This is like a pop quiz to see if people are paying super, super attention. Dr. Lee Edelman is a Fletcher Professor of English Literature at Tufts University. Dr. Edelman began his academic career. We already read that. In this episode, we focus on no future. Topics include the relationship between symbolism and politics, the child, reproductive futurism, fighting for the children, queerness and politic, I don't know what that word is, a culture of death, anti-homosexuality and anti-abortion movements, and anti-nationalism. It's a lot to do in a single podcast. Let's see who did the pop quiz. When I say queer theory and the death drive, what does that remind you of? It reminds me of Anti-Civilization 2, Green Anarchy, Against the Gender Nightmare. Yeah, it sounds like Baden, doesn't it? Against the Gender Nightmare. What did they talk about in Against the Gender Nightmare? They talked about abolishing all of civilization, didn't they? The Leviathan, the domesticated, all that stuff. Yeah, he does actually kind of sound, he might actually have some of those, if we're being honest about it. Listen, I always try to tell people, queer theory is not about sexualizing children. That's not what they're doing. But that doesn't mean that sexualization of children doesn't happen, and it doesn't mean it's not a problem. And it doesn't mean there won't occasionally be overlap between queer theorists and people sexualizing kids. Like, it does happen. It just doesn't actually happen that often. And the thing that we are most worried about when it comes to queer theory is their goal to abolish the gender binary and the nuclear family. That is what they want to do. And then sometimes some of the people involved with that also have crazy ideas about kids. And if Lee Edelman is really an anti-civilization person, as I suspect Lee Edelman might be, I think, it would not surprise me that he might have a lot of crazy things. Okay, Music Can has a definition for that word I didn't want to read. Synth homosexuality. Highlights the queer figure as an embodiment of a senseless, non-reproductive enjoyment that refuses to be recuperated by social order's demand for meaning and futurity. Oh, thank you. That makes so much sense. That just explains everything, Music Can. I really do appreciate that. Yup, we are actually talking about nihilism here. Yes, absolutely. 100%. These are gender nihilists. Exactly. They are. There is actually a document called Gender Nihilism. There's actually at least two documents called Gender Nihilism. We'll read those at some point. Did Trump make me lose my mind? Honey, I don't give a flying fuck about Trump. I didn't vote for Trump. I don't even think about Trump. Trump is years behind where I am, honey. Sit your ass down and learn. You're got a lot to talk about today. Trump, my God. I'm not the one obsessed with gender. Hey, bro, I got 2 rules in my chat. Number 1 rule is don't be a dick. Do not insult me. Do not insult other people in the chat. Number 2 rule is no whining. Number 3 rule is if you disrupt my chat with nonsense, then I'm going to tell you to stop. And if you don't stop, then I'm going to ban you and prevent you from talking. Okay? Just so we're clear, because you kind of seem like you might be disrupting my chat with nonsense. I got other stuff to do today, man. I guess so. Well, but that's not allowed here. So you might have to go somewhere else. I'm very deeply sorry. If you want, I can't. Oh, yeah. Oh, I just did. Sorry about that. So that takes care of that little problem, doesn't it? Anyway, so we are going to be... Oh, is this the one playing Jeopardy? Is he the one playing Jeopardy? Oh, great. Yeah. Okay. Desire is more important than sex for reproduction. Pleasure is more important than creating future populations. Yeah, that makes sense, Music Can. That does. Thank you. Yeah, can't ban me. That's a really great way to get banned on my channel, is to tell me I can't ban them. I actually can. I can very easily. It's not even that hard. So that's what we're going to be watching today, guys. We are kicking off Queer Marxism Month. Now, if you don't know what Queer Marxism is, if you would like a basic introductory course to queer Marxism, well, I got a couple things for you. Number 1, I literally just did a live stream earlier today over on my Substack, Karlyn, Karlyn.substack.com. You can find it right here. Pride Month is here, and I'm covering queer content all month long. In this video, which is also uploaded to YouTube, is also uploaded to X, I break down the difference between queer and trans. I talk about what queer Marxism is, the goal of abolishing the gender binary and the nuclear family. We talk about the goal of Drag Queen Story Hour. We talk about a basic kind of like high-level overview of the difference between queer and trans, queer and gay, and all that stuff. And I talk about what I expect to see at Pride festivals coming up this month. And it's going to be a big month, guys. I promise you. We're going to see so much nonsense this month. Everyone better hunker down and get ready and get like a cupboard full of snacks or something, because you're not going to want to leave the internet with the amount of stupid, crazy shit we're going to see this month. I promise you. So if you want that introduction, check that out over on the Substack. You can also find it over on the Decode the Left podcast. Did you guys know Did you guys know that you don't just have to look at video of me looking crazy into my phone? You can listen to this stuff. No, I literally just want the URL. I literally just want the URL. I just want the URL. That's all I wanted. Nope, couldn't even give me that, could you? Couldn't even give me that. Now I got something playing in my ear that I don't want in my ear. Hang on, hang on. Oh my god! Why did it open my podcast thing? Anyway, I was literally just trying to show you that you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and apparently my computer doesn't wanna let me do that. So that's fine. It's okay. Nothing we can do about it. That's all right. But you can subscribe to it on there. You can also head over to the Substack and go to the How to Speak Socialist section of the Substack. And right up at the top, we have our 4-hour on-demand crash course, How to Speak Socialist. I get into a lot of queer theory in this. So if you want to know the goal of abolishing the gender binary, if you want more information about that, if you want to talk more about abolish the family, again, and the benefit of going to the How to Speak Socialist presentation is you're going to get a more well-rounded view of the left, but also you're going to get to see dozens of clips from real leftist activist training. So you never have to take my word for it. You can hear them say it themselves. Everything I tell you guys about what the left believes, it comes from somewhere. All right? It all comes from somewhere. And so I show you where it comes from in the Left Zone trainings. You can find that over on the Substack, and that's another way to get started. Also, a couple other announcements. We have a spy stream tonight. I usually on Monday nights do a supporter call with my supporter community. We will be preempting the supporter call, and instead we will be doing a spy stream tonight. Now, I'm not going to say a lot about what that spy stream is. Just know that there's a spy stream tonight. It starts around 7:30, okay? 7:30-ish. Spy stream is open to supporters on Substack, on locals, on YouTube channel members, on Patreon, on Twitter subscribers. And if you are a supporter on any of those sites, you can find the information to log into. But we will have to preempt our supporter Zoom in order to do Spy Stream tonight. So I hope everyone's okay with it. It's still a supporter perk. It's just the way it is. Spy Stream, I'm at the beholden of whenever they want to do the trainings. And then after Spy Stream tonight at 9 p.m. in the supporter Discord, we will be streaming The Passion of the Christ tonight. Or rather, Mac B will be streaming The Passion of the Christ tonight. I am just going to go and watch. I love that movie. I think it's great. I can't wait to hear what trivia Mac B has for it. That will be playing at 9 p.m. Eastern time tonight in the supporter Discord. So make sure that you guys join the supporter Discord if you have access to that perk. And you can find the link in the chat over on the Substack for Twitter Substack subscribers. If you need the link, just DM me on whatever platform you are a member on, and I'll make sure to get it to you. But you should be able to join the the Discord and join us for later, and that's going to be great. Also, I have a new book out. Actually, let's go here. I have a new book out. Now, this is a short story that I wrote a couple months ago as a little experiment, and I published it for members of the Red Menace Collective. I spent some time over the last couple months revising it and expanding it. And so I made it a little bit longer, added a little bit more detail, a little bit more character stuff, all that good stuff. And I am really pleased that it is already up for sale on Amazon. I literally just submitted it last night and it's already available today, which is awesome. And it is called Alice in Queer Land. This, as you might guess, is a take on the classic Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland. I'm a big fan of Alice in Wonderland, like legitimately. I actually, if you see my office, I have all sorts of Alice in Wonderland stuff over here. I love Alice in Wonderland. Okay. I love the characters. I love all the interesting things that the characters do, the different games you can play with the characters. And luckily for us, Alice in Wonderland is now in the public domain. And so if I want to satirize Alice in Wonderland by making Alice go down the DEI rabbit hole into a queer, pride-filled utopia where identity isn't even real, where truth isn't really a thing, where time isn't real. Did you guys know in Queerland, time is literally not real? There's a whole segment about it with the Mad Hatter Tea Party. The Mad Hatter is a woke academic mob, by the way. The Mad Hatter's Tea Party is the woke academic mob. The Queen of Hearts is a drag queen. It gets a little dark sometimes. But I'm really proud of this short. Yes, exactly. In this case, not following the white rabbit would have been a really, really good idea. But sadly, Alice did follow the white rabbit. She went into the DEI rabbit hole. I had a ton of fun writing this. There were times in writing this, and you guys are going to see these lines show up that I even kind of like surprised myself with some of the things that came out of my mind. Because I do a lot of this stuff stream of conscious, right? I write a lot of these books just like stream of conscious, and then I read back what I wrote later, and I'm like, oh my God, that's actually amazing and hilarious. I made myself crack up in the writing of this book. There was so much queer jargon and ideas infused throughout the whole thing, and yet somehow it still makes sense. And I actually am really thrilled with the way it came out. It is a relatively short book. It's going to be a very quick read. It's only like 80 pages long or something. So it is a very, very teeny tiny short book. And so I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope you pick up your copy on Amazon. You can get it in paperback or Kindle. Also, members of the Red Menace Collective can download a free PDF over at the redmenacecollective.substack.com. That is also available. And if you do end up reading it, I would love it if you would leave a review on Amazon for me. I would really, really appreciate it. I'm psyched about this book. And I think you guys are going to love it. I think you're going to enjoy it. And I want more people to be satirizing the left, okay? I think that satirizing the left is actually a really great way to go about it. And guys, just so you know, every time this troll comes back, we're not giving him any attention at all. We're just banning him again, okay? So we do have our little troll who keeps coming back in. No one acknowledge him moving forward. No one acknowledge him. No attention. Just ban. It's not a big deal, right? He can keep wasting his time, and we can just keep removing him. All right, I do have a couple more things before we get started. First off, I want to make sure everyone is following the Queer Marxism Twitter account. This is the Queer Marxism Project. This is a project that I'm working on to archive all of the crazy queer Marxist stuff I've got going on. And Queer Marxist Month, we're going to have a lot of content on there. Now, big shout out to Ariel Scarcella, who featured the Queer Marxism Project Twitter account in a recent video that she did. How cool is that? Ariel follows the account. Ariel is actually getting a copy of Alice in Queerland, so I really hope she likes it. And of course, she had to feature a tweet in which I had a typo. Of course, but that's all right. She knew what I meant. Everyone knew what I meant, okay? She featured a tweet that says, queer Marxists want to abolish the gender binary. The gender binary means men and women. They believe they are socially constructed categories under capitalism and therefore not real. How cool is that? So the Queer Marxism Twitter account is getting noticed, and I like that. I haven't even really been posting on it in the last month or so, and it's still getting, and the content on there is still making the rounds. So that's going to be really great. Now, also, there are other people who have noticed the Queer Marxism account, and I just have to share this with you guys because it's just so fucking funny. Can I have a point of personal privilege before we get into the show? It's just so funny. So I always tell people it's important to know who you can have on your side. And there are some people who claim to be anti-woke, who claim to be against queer ideology, who claim to be against what the left is doing, but for some reason, they've already blocked the Queer Marxism Twitter account. Now, the Queer Marxism Twitter account is just an account where I literally post queer Marxist stuff. Like, literally, that's all it is. It's an account where I post queer Marxist stuff to give people a place to go where they can just find queer Marxist stuff, okay? Let's see who's already blocked it. James Lindsay has already blocked the Queer Marxism Twitter account. I never would have guessed that James would have already blocked the Queer Marxism Twitter account. I thought that James was an expert in queer theory. Wouldn't James want more information about queer theory? Apparently not. We also have Tiffany Justice of Moms for Liberty. For no reason other than the Queer Marxism Twitter account posted evidence that Tiffany didn't like because Tiffany is trying to shill a narrative that is not aligned with reality, and I can't help it if the evidence contradicts what Tiffany wants it to say. And therefore, ergo, Tiffany Justice and Moms for Liberty has already blocked the Queer Marxism Twitter account. How about that? How about the Jewess? Do you remember the Jewess? The Jewess is the woman who claims to care about all this anti-woke stuff, but really she's just a Zionist that wants to push Israel. She was actually the first person to block the account. She said, "How many accounts of yours do I have to block, Karlyn, you fat fucking nerd?" Apparently Zionist Jews that are blatantly shilling for Israel think that you need to be a certain weight to cover the far left. Did I miss the memo? Ma'am, I cover socialism on the internet. I break down queer ideology on the internet. Did I miss the memo that there was a weight requirement to cover socialism on the internet, Jewess? Did I miss that? Did I miss that? Oh, well, you know. And then, of course, we've got the good Christian Carrie Smith has already blocked the Queer Marxism account. Now, I bring up Carrie because actually I've got something else about her. And I bring this up because James Lindsay retweeted it. You can see James retweet, right? So James Lindsay today basically said to Matt Taibbi, James Lindsay today accused Matt Taibbi of doing degenerate sexual acts like Glenn Greenwald got caught doing on his sex tape. That I don't really care about the sex tape, but a lot of people do, and James Lindsay certainly does. And James Lindsay does not like Glenn Greenwald because Glenn Greenwald opposes Israel, and James is supporting Israel because James is funded by Israel. So Matt Taibbi basically kind of made a really milquetoast statement about Glenn Greenwald and said he is without sin. Let him cast the first stone. James responded saying, "You're just telling us you have similar sins." Oh, yeah? And then Carrie, the good Christian Carrie, retweeted James, and you guys are not going to fucking believe this. Carrie and James are trying to shill a story to claim that James is probably becoming a Christian in order to try to win back the Christian wine moms, even though we all know that James is an atheist, and James's stepdaughter has told us overtly he's an atheist. And there is nothing that about James that has become. James has an open marriage currently with his wife that he forces his wife to be in, that she doesn't actually want to be in, so he can go and fuck his Moms for Liberty benefactors all over the country for realsies. But Carrie wrote today, you guys are going to fucking love this. As an observer, it has struck me the past year or two that God is working on Lindsay. This may not be his opinion, but it's mine. As someone who God worked on for a while, slowly breaking down all the defenses I'd put up against God, Lindsay regularly shares scriptures and without even twisting it. He more often than not seems to be viewing the world through a spiritual lens, not merely a cultural or political one. He has been advocating for Christianity as an antidote to tyranny. He defends Christians in our pushback against Marxist infiltration in the church. Yeah, I bet the Catholics feel really defended, Carrie. He seems to ponder the meaning of Scripture. Well, James has pondered the meaning of Scripture a lot. James, in fact, wrote an entire book about being an atheist while pondering the meaning of Scripture. And in posts like this one, it's always fascinating for me to read the replies. Half of them are from atheists angry he is speaking what he sees as a Christian perspective, and half of them are Christians, wrongly calling him the enemy. So James and Carrie are shilling a narrative that James is definitely, sort of, thinking about becoming a Christian because James pissed off all the Christians on Twitter. And now he has to be like, but guys, I'm totally converting, because he needs the Christians to take him back, because the Christian Zionists are where he was getting a lot of his money. And what do you know it? The Christian Zionists might like that Jimmy Boy supports Israel, but they don't like that he constantly shits on Christians. So that was interesting. But that wasn't the only interesting thing from this. So I've told you all the people that have blocked the Queer Marxism account. But not Frank, not Psycho Frank McCormick. Now, as a reminder, last week, we exposed that Frank McCormick is a self-identified queer who wrote an article for a self-identified queer website named Queer Majority. Queer Majority is a website that claims to be anti-woke, but in a very brief overview of their content, we can find a ton of queer Marxist stuff on their website. So who would the classical liberal so-called anti-woke activist, Psycho Frank McCormick, who is off his psychiatric meds, which we know because he tweeted about it, do you think that the supposed classical liberal anti-woke activist is going to support something like the Queer Marxism Project, which just is about literally archiving evidence related to queer Marxism? No. He's going to say, here are a bunch of pictures of you that I don't like and you're fat and ugly. This is the intellectual classical liberal response from the anti-woke community. But I have to show you guys this, and then we're going to get into the show, I promise. It was just so funny to me. So some Zionist responded and said, so this whole thing is just Karlyn and a couple of sock accounts. Wait a second. So how about we do an experiment in the chat? I've got my hands here. You can now see the chat on the screen, okay? I didn't have the chat on the screen on earlier. You can see my hands. Can you guys type into the chat if it letting Frankie know that I'm not actually you? Because this is a lie these people like to tell about me. They're like, all the accounts that support Karlyn are just sock accounts that she runs. Can you guys, while I'm explaining this next piece, can you guys just all chat in, just like letting Frank know that maybe, and you can see my hands are right here. See, my hands are right here. I'm not typing anything, Frank. My hands are right here. You can see the chat on the screen. I'm not typing anything. Yeah, they're all me, Frankie. They're all me, bro. You got me. You got me. I must be magic or something. I got a whole live chat going right now. Live chatting on the screen, telling you explicitly that they're not me, Frankie. But what I thought was even funnier than that, is Frank replied, and he said, yes, literally no one exists that will work with her. Huh. Not really. And she just keeps making these new projects and stringing a dwindling group down as she robs them blind. So let me be clear about this. Frank's issue with me is I create too much content on the internet. I have too many projects on the internet. God forbid I start new projects when I have new ideas for content to create. And he thinks that I'm doing all this while no one supports me and consumes my work, and it's all just me in disguise. Do I have that right? Frank is actually upset that I started new projects. Does anyone else I find this fucking hilarious. It's like this is the big grievance they have against me. Karlyn is a grifter because she starts new projects. It's like, no one has to sign up and fund the new projects, Frankie. Karlyn is a grifter because she's creating too much content about the left. It's like, what the fuck is wrong with you? And in the meantime, if we go to Frank's Substack, we can see that it was launched 4 years ago. And Frankie Frank's Substack hasn't been updated since August 2022. And this is the person that's oh so upset that I'm just creating too much content on the internet for you guys. But he swears up and down that you're all just secretly me. Yeah. All right, Frankie. All right. So I had to share that with you guys because it was funny to me, and therefore it has to be funny to you. Let's dig into our video, shall we? We got about an hour video to go today. Oh, please, God, no. No. I would never mass genocide. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? Guys, if you've never watched Queer Marxism with me or Socialism with me, some of this stuff in this video might be hard to understand for you. It's not that you're not very smart. I'm sure you are very smart and very capable. What the hell? Hang on. Why isn't this? Oh, because it'll change when I put the video up. Never mind. Never mind. Not touching nothing. So, if you guys have never watched Queer Marxism with me before, please know that the language might confuse you. That's not a testament to your intelligence. It's just because it's different. If you have questions about what they're saying as we make our way through the video, please let me know in the chat. Nick says, I met Karlyn at PorkFest with several other members. Yeah, it's true. Nick has actually been around me in person for a whole week and somehow didn't kill me. But he did. He did. Anyway, so Frank, you're confused about queer Marxism? That's cool, bro. Ask questions in the chat. We're going to watch this video. The best way to learn how to speak socialist and to learn the language of the left is just to immerse yourself in the content. If you don't understand what something means, ask us in the chat. We will answer all questions, and I'm going to do commentary on the video as we make our way through it, and we're going to see how this goes. I've never watched Lee Edelman before, so I don't know what to expect for today, but I think it's going to be a glorious start to Queer Marxism Month. Guys, please mount the like button if you would be so kind. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. And I hope if you're new here, I hope we can welcome you back. I stream Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. We do Socialism Saturday on Saturdays at 6 p.m. Let's get this party started.
Episode of the Dissenter. I'm your host, as always, Ricardo Lopes, and today I'm joined by
No, you guys can't hear that. Never mind. False alarm.
Dr. Lee Edelman. He is Fletcher Professor of English Literature at Tufts University. He began his academic career as a scholar of 20th century American poetry. He has since become a central figure in the development, dissemination, and rethinking of queer theory. His current work explores the intersections of sexuality, rhetorical theory, cultural politics, and film. He is the author of several books, including the one we're going to focus on today, No Future, Queer Theory, and The Death Drive. So, Dr. Edelman, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you on.
I'm happy to be here with you, Ricardo.
So, my first question would be, how do you look at the relationship between symbolism and politics?
Well, to answer that question, I think we have to take a step back and ask what we understand by politics. And for me, politics has to be understood as the various processes by which controversy, argument, and consensus around shaping a polity, a collectivity, is negotiated. And to that extent, politics itself is always about rhetoric. It's always about the production of a coherent body, a unity. So symbolism is invariably at the core of politics because the political symbol is the coherence of the polity itself. And all of the arguments, all of the dissent, to speak to the title of your podcast, all of the dissent that is central to political operation is centered on trying to appropriate or disseminate a symbol that will totalize, that will make coherent the potentially disparate forces that constitute a political body. The way in which symbolism can be used by various factions within that polity are always in the service of a vision of how that polity itself symbolizes something beyond itself, symbolizes something like meaning itself. So for there to be politics, for there to be a polity, a collectivity, there is always some sense in which the argument is an argument about meaning, and thus symbolism is going to be inseparable from it.
Mm-hmm. So in your book, you focus on a very specific symbol, the child. What does it represent politically?
Well, the first thing to say is that the child is, throughout the book, identified with a capital C. So the child is not to be confused with actual real-world children, and that's part of the problem, as we will see in a minute. The child is an image of the collectivity itself as always in the process of development, formation, and preservation, so that the child becomes the image within most political structures of the very goal of constructing the political body as a living entity. Toward that end, the state, if it is a
Hang on. Let him cook, Frank. Let him cook. Just chill, okay, bro?
state, will be imaged in terms of the
Thanks,
need
Reagan. I thought it was
to
a different guy.
perpetuate itself, to preserve itself, to conserve itself, which is why politics is so bound up with conservatism, even when the politics are liberal or radical. The politics of conservation at the core of the conceptualization of a political entity as a coherent body finds its best representation in the child, capital C, in whose name that polity is being constructed and perpetuated. So the child becomes I think I said in the book, the perpetual horizon of the political endeavor itself. The politics of a given collectivity are on both sides in general.
It's literally not always European channels. We just happen to be watching a European channel today. I don't like statements like this, like it's always this, it's always that, because it's almost never always anything.
Going to be framed as serving the interests of the child as the image of the future, which is not the image of any one child's future, but the image of the future of that political structure as it embodies itself in the idea of a child. So actual real world children will often be sacrificed to the idea of the child because the child is precisely a symbol of the polity itself.
And that, I think, connects us to the concept of reproductive futurism, correct? Could you
Yes,
tell
let's
us
talk about that.
It does. So in No Future, I produced this term of reproductive futurism to describe the engine of broad numbers of social polities. That is to say, the imperative of a collectivity, insofar as it is engaged in the political struggle for recognition and survival,
You're fine, Tom. Relax.
is always to reproduce itself and to assure that it, in reproducing itself, reproduces.
All right, Frank, I'm starting to think you're that little troll kid that we've banned 15 times already. So, no, he's not saying shite. But if you can't sit and listen for more than 3 seconds without shitposting in my chat, this isn't going to be the best place for you. We do serious adult content here. We do not do shitposting. The next shitpost in my chat's going to get you a timeout. If you continue shitposting, oh, yep, you're that little trolly kid. Goodbye. See? You're nice. And then this is what they do. So he's been banned. Adios. Anyway, going back to this. What he's describing, what he's calling social, what is it called? Reproductive futurity. He's basically describing social reproduction theory, which social reproduction theory just says social systems will reproduce themselves until they are disrupted. So social systems will naturally reproduce themselves. So if you have parents that are conservative and work in corporate America, you are much more likely to be conservative and work in corporate America. All other influences, if all other influences were removed, you would be conservative and live in corporate America. Now, of course, we have school, there's other influences, there's media and movies, stuff like that. So there are other influences today, but generally speaking, social systems broadly will just continue to reproduce the same type of social system with some evolution until they're disrupted. I think this just makes sense. Right? If you got a group of people that's used to doing things a certain way, those people are going to keep doing things that way because it's the path of least resistance. When it comes to the far left, what they're talking about is the nuclear family specifically will reproduce capitalism by raising kids with capitalist values until the nuclear family is disrupted. I think this is overcomplicating it unnecessarily. Like, really, no one knows what this means, bro. So this Professor Edelman is doing gain of function research on how to increase vitality to the queer mind virus. No. First of all, you're just talking to make yourself sound smart. This doesn't actually mean anything. Secondly, this doesn't mean anything to normal people who you might be talking to, so I don't even know why we're talking about it. Thirdly, he hasn't actually said anything to that effect. You just made a whole bunch of shit up to sound smart. I don't give out participation trophies for doing that. No, this is also a really low IQ retarded take, Manny, and you've been doing those in the chat already. Guys, I swear to God, if you are not serious about learning this content, go somewhere else. I'm not going to have this. I'm really not going to have it. There's a group of people here that's trying to focus on the content, and you fucking retards are causing distraction in the chat. From now on, there's going to be a zero tolerance policy. No fucking stupid shit in the chat. If you have questions, that's one thing, but this is not a real question, Manny. This is you being a retarded shit poster. So, the idea is that the nuclear family will continue to reproduce capitalism until the nuclear family is disrupted. And so that's why they're attacking the nuclear family, because they're trying to disrupt the literal reproduction mechanism of capitalism. And just so we're clear for anyone that's new, the retards that are shitposting in the chat will not be able to explain a single thing I just explained to you. They have learned absolutely nothing because they don't fucking listen. They just come here to cause problems, which is why we ban them. We are not James Lindsay. If you think we're going to tolerate that, go somewhere else.
The imperative of a collectivity, insofar as it is engaged in the political struggle for recognition and survival, is always to reproduce itself and to assure that it, in reproducing itself, reproduces what it conceives of as its privileged access to meaning. The conflict among political ideologies, after all, is always a conflict about what does it mean to live together? What does it mean to form a society, and how should that society be articulated? The predicate of all of those issues is that there is a meaning to society, and the society should preserve its meaning. Thus, the very idea of futurism is that the future is not simply what will come next. The future is the image of what already has been and must be preserved. So reproductive futurism is the logic by which, in social organizations, all of us are compelled to imagine the possibility of a becoming, which is always, in fact, a repetition of what has already been understood as our being. To that extent, reproductive futurism is actually a logic by which a future as difference is prohibited from happening, precisely because one could appeal to different philosophical registers to express this, but precisely to the extent that what various philosophers would call an event, a radical transformation, an eruption of what has not been recognizable within the structure of things as they are, is conceptualized in the logic of reproductive futurism precisely as destructive, as an undoing of the...
What is he talking about? Pop quiz for the chat. Let's see who can speak academic. What is he talking about? Any guesses? What did he just say? What is he talking about? Was anyone paying attention, or were you paying attention to the chat? This is why we don't allow retards to shitpost in the chat, because the retard shitposting in the chat distract people from actually what's going on in the stream. What was he just talking about? No, he wasn't. He was not tossing. There is never any instance where these people are doing word salad, okay? Very rarely. Yep, see, people are looking at the chat. And this is why we need to pay attention to the video. Okay, I'll play it again. Listen.
Philosophers would call an event, a radical transformation, an eruption of what has not been recognizable within the structure of things as they are, is conceptualized in the logic of reproductive futurism precisely as destructive, as an undoing of the order of meaning. Because
what is he talking about? What is he talking about? I just gave you a second chance to listen to it. What is he talking about? Do I need to play it again? Nah, maybe not. I didn't hear him say queer. Who heard him say queer? I didn't hear him say queer. You guys have got to stop making shit up. You really do. There was only one word required for this answer, and that was revolution. He's talking about the Marxist revolution. No. People are making this way harder than it is. He is talking about the revolution. That is all he's talking about. Everyone who said anything other than revolution just made it way too hard and is wrong. And I'm going to say this too. He didn't say nothing about queer. He hasn't said anything about queer yet. Which is also the same reason that I addressed metafarcical earlier, when metafarcical just made up a whole... You want to talk about word salad? This is actually word... Like, this is all made up nonsense that is not grounded in anything this guy has said. It may come from somewhere, but it doesn't come from this. I bring this up not to make anyone feel bad, but you have got to stop making shit up. You've got to stop jumping to conclusions. You've got to stop just going through a list of buzzwords in your head and saying, this must be this, if what they're actually saying doesn't align with that. You have got to listen. Actively listen. No fucking around in the chat. Your job, I don't care if no one's chatting in at all. Your job when you're on these streams is to actively listen to what is being said. I will try to break it down for you guys. I will try to explain as much as I can. And listen, I have my moments too where I get on my phone and I'm on Twitter and I'm not listening probably as closely as I should be. I have my moments too. I'm not going to make it seem like I'm perfect. I'm not. These are hard things to get through. We all struggle. But this is something I see continuously and I don't like it. You guys should be able to listen to what's being said and to repeat that back without inserting anything else that hasn't been said. So please make sure you're practicing that. No. What you did was make shit up to try to feel intellectually superior in the chat. What you did was make shit up. I don't want excuses. I don't want I don't care. We deal with the evidence as it is, not what you want it to be, not what you've heard somewhere else, not what you heard me even say on a live stream last week. If it's not coming up in the evidence, then that's not what we're dealing with. This is about listening to the content for the content itself, not inserting anything else that's not there. Part of the problem with the right is that they're constantly inserting shit that isn't there. They're making shit up. Oh, this is obviously about X, Y, B, and Z. Has nothing to fucking do with X, Y, B, and Z. Literally has nothing to do with it. If I present a video and say of someone clearly saying this is about abolishing the gender binary, I've got conservatives in my feed going, they're sexualizing children. There is nothing about sexualizing children. You literally made that up. Literally, there was no mention of children even in the fucking video, and you're still like, grooming! And this is why conservatives are fucking insane. Because they make shit up that isn't there. And then they run around going, groomers! And then they spend literally millions and millions and millions of dollars on banning a couple of fucking library books that are still publicly available anyway. And then they go, hey guys, we did it! We win! We win! We win! We win! We win! No, see, now you're making more shit up. Oh, she's just so mean. I'm just gonna sit here and I'm not gonna say anything, and I'm not allowed to shitpost, and I can't make shit up, and there's no reason. Now you're being a whiny little bitch that is taking their toys and going home because you got a talking to. Conservatives are such fucking pussies, man. Every time. You guys are such thin-skinned pussies. How did you even get through school in the first place? Oh, I forgot. School never required you to think. This is probably the first place in your life you've ever been required to fucking think and act like a fucking adult. Got it.
As difference is prohibited from happening, precisely because one could appeal to different philosophical.
And by the way, I promise you guys, Metafarcical didn't actually hear any of what I just said because he was so in his feelings and probably crying at his keyboard. Hey, tell me, she's telling me I was wrong and I can't make it up and I can't ship. He didn't hear anything I just said. So hopefully other people learned from it.
Registers to express this, but precisely to the extent that what various philosophers would call an event, a radical transformation, an eruption of what has not been recognizable within the structure of things as they are, is conceptualized in the logic of reproductive futurism precisely as destructive, as an undoing of the order of meaning, because the order of meaning is seen as simply being that which it always already has been, and therefore must always be.
Mm-hmm. Could you characterize those that, in your own terms, are fighting for, or represent the side that is fighting for the children?
Well, fairly easily, because that's basically everyone. All of us are acculturated to think of ourselves through the logic of reproductive futurism, which means that all of us are acculturated
thanks,
to
Donnie
think
girl,
of ourselves
appreciate you.
as on the side of the children, where the children are simply the massification of the child. And thus you can have in contemporary politics, say like those of the United States today, you can have movements where in a state like Alabama, it has now been, it has become criminal to provide trans children with any medical support to reinforce their transition. Thus, these actual living children are sacrificed on the altar of an idea of the child that must be conceived as heterosexual, as reproductive, as conforming to an ideology that perpetuates the meaning of the sex gender system as it has been received. So that on the conservative side, one can clearly say, even though the persons who are instituting this absolute prohibition on assisting in any way or providing information about transitioning to trans children, they are clearly creating conditions that are going to be destructive to the mental health and possibly even the lives of trans children who, as we know, are at higher risks of depression and suicide. But they will do this in the name of the child. On the other hand,
so what he's saying is, when he says the child, he's saying capital C child. So he's saying this like it's a proper descriptor of a concept, okay? When he says the child, he's not saying all kids. What he's saying is, we have this conception of what a child is, and we are all fighting to save the child based on what that conception is. And conservatives have the conception that the child is cis heteronormativity. And because of that, conservatives, and this presentation was a couple of years ago, because of that, conservatives are implementing laws against transing kids based on this concept of the child being a cis heteronormative child, which is basically, by the way, a normal child that is the product of a monogamous two-person relationship in a nuclear family. That's all that means. It doesn't mean the child is straight, because that's not their definition of it. It just literally means a child raised in a nuclear family with traditional values and norms that uphold capitalism and stuff like that. Or it could even be a liberal child. It doesn't even need to be like, I'm not even saying it's a conservative family. I'm just saying it's a child of a two-parent household and a monogamous marriage in the nuclear family, raised with kind of like normie values. That's what he's saying when he says cis heteronormative, okay? So he's saying conservatives have this idea of the child, the proper thing, as a cis heteronormative child. So they're implementing all these laws. And in implementing these laws, conservatives are not considering that there are other children that are not cis heteronormative, that are trans, and they're hurting all these other kids over here because they're implementing laws based on their conceptualization of the child.
The left will also be fighting for the children, to the extent that they will say, but think of these children. These trans children need these resources in order to survive in an environment which is unable and unwilling to recognize their identities. To that extent, the contestation as a political contestation is one in which both sides mirror the discourse of reproductive futurism produced by the other, because every side presents itself as fighting for the children. Mm-hmm. The alternative, which would be a queer politics, were it possible.
Yes, this is correct, Chad Jesus. They would also criticize homonormative. So it doesn't have to do with man and woman relationships. It just has to do with monogamous two-person relationships.
Would be a politics that no longer sees the future as the horizon of our existence, but recognizes instead something like the imperative of a present with its link to what in Lacanian psychoanalysis is called jouissance, or enjoyment, or the expression of drive, which is an unconscious force that controls and shapes our actions at every moment without our volition or will. The queer politics would see that engagement with drive and jouissance as dismantling both futurity and our investment in futurity, and dismantling our recognition of our sense of ourselves. As you can see, even from that very brief sketch of what that queer politics would look like, it's not a politics that very many people would or could practice, because you can't practice a politics of the drive. The drive, being unconscious, can't be harnessed. It can't be turned to an object that one is trying to shape a political structure through. And indeed, the very idea of shaping a political structure presupposes that one wants to produce something within a register of meaning that is going to have some enduring existence. So to some extent, the alternative to the politics of fighting for the child is a step outside of what is recognizable as politics.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean in the book by the child as an end that is endlessly postponed?
Well, the history of a family, like the history of a nation, or like the history of a civilization, is always seen as needing another step, another link in the chain of its perpetuation. So there is no more the possibility of saying, your child has had a child, so therefore the links in the chain of this family are completed, than there is to say that we have protected the laws of a given civilization against those who would undo them, and therefore we have achieved the realization of the society in the form of the child that we intended. There is always a new threat to the child. The child is always perpetually under threat, precisely because dissent, politics as dissent, is precisely about a disagreement concerning the way in which collectivities should be organized and meaning should be understood. It's not necessarily a disagreement about the imperative of meaning, but it's a disagreement about the terms of meaning. And therefore, it's a disagreement between the two sides that are both fighting for the child. And both of them.
This guy has smoked way too much weed. He has made this so fucking complicated. He's basically saying each side has created a societal ideal. And those societal ideals, which he calls the child, are different from each other. And therefore, ergo, each side is going to fight for the child, their societal ideal, in different ways. And those ways are not going to align. It's like he's made this so he's like come up with some like philosophical thing with all this framework and all these fancy names for things to just say different people have different values. Different people want different types of visions for the world. And they're going to try to create their vision of the world. That's all he's saying right now, okay? I'm pretty sure. If someone disagrees with me, let me know. But that's all I've gotten out of it so far. Which is fine. Like, I'm hearing a lot of stuff around social reproduction theory. Like I said, he was talking about the revolution earlier. That's 100% true. But no. This person has advanced ideas that are currently kicking your fucking ass. I'm getting so tired of this. There will be no more of this. He's just stupid. You're fucking stupid. He's a professor at Yale. You're fucking stupid. He put himself in a position of influencing how many young minds over the course of his work at Yale. You are fucking stupid. He is smart. He is currently on the winning team. You are currently on the team that's losing to him. You are stupid. He is smart. He's stupid. His brain is dumb. Like, do you know how stupid you sound to me? No. No. Mm-mm. Don't. Every time. And you understand, this is the shit that's distracting, right? You are the bro.
See the other or the others
That's why we can't
as
have nice
threats
things.
to the way in which their vision of the perpetuation of meaning, and so the perpetuation of the child, and so the perpetuation of the polity should be carried out.
Mm-hmm. You've already touched on queerness, but would you characterize it as a form of sexual expression, or is it something else?
Good question.
Like any word, queerness can be used by different
Hang
people
on.
to signify.
What question was just asked? I want to make sure the chat's actually listening. What question was just asked? Pop quiz. How many people are listening? The question was very simple and very straightforward. What question was just asked? No. No more whining. No more. You were spoken to. Either you get the fucking line or I put you in a timeout and you stop talking. Can you answer what question was just asked? Is queerness related to sexuality? Thank you. Is queerness a form of sexual expression? Thank you. Thank you for confirming you were listening. Again.
Out.
Mm-hmm. You've already touched on queerness, but would you characterize it as a form of sexual expression, or is it something else?
Like any word, queerness can be used by different people to signify different things. As I use queerness, it is not in and of itself what we understand as a form of sexual expression. That is to say, one could not define queerness as a particular set of acts or as a particular set of identities. In fact, as I've said many times, queerness is not an identity, but it's the dismantling of identities.
Oh,
It can never be an identity, but could only disturb an identity. So to that extent, what I understand,
queerness is not an identity. It is the dismantling of identities. That sounds a little bit like exactly what we've been reading in Queer Ultraviolence. It sounds a little bit like what we have heard in other places, like the Gender Accelerationist Manifesto, the Gender Nihilist Manifesto. That's all extremely radicalized queer Marxist literature, by the way, if you're new to this. And then we read this all in Counter Revolutionary Book Club. You can find Counter Revolutionary Book Club over on my Substack if you would like to. Anyway, so what he just said is we want to abolish all identities. Queer Marxists are anti-identity politics. They are not in favor of identity politics. The people playing identity politics are Democrats, liberals, and progressives. This is why it's critically important that people start accepting that Democrats, liberals, and progressives are not the same as radical revolutionary socialists. They are two completely different things. Queer Marxists are anti-identity politics. They are anti-identity. They believe that all identities were created as a social construct based on capitalism. The identities they're primarily concerned with right now are man and woman, but all identities fall under this umbrella. So this is why when we talk about queer Marxists wanting to abolish the gender binary, the reason they want to abolish the gender binary is capitalism created the gender binary. That means men and women. It put men at the top of the hierarchy, women at the bottom of the hierarchy. Men are the oppressors, women are the oppressed. That's the patriarchy. How do you get rid of the gender hierarchy? You eliminate the categories. You eliminate the categories of men and women, and then there are no categories, so there is equity. Equity means Marxism. That's what they're talking about, except they believe that with all identity categories, which our friend from Yale just said. Listen again. Queer is not about sexuality. Queer is not about sexual acts. Queer is about the elimination of categories. When you eliminate categories, you eliminate hierarchy. When you eliminate hierarchy, you eliminate oppression. This is what they believe, not what I believe. When you eliminate oppression, then you've got Marxism.
we understand as a form of sexual expression. That is to say, one could not define queerness as a particular set of acts or as a particular set of identities. In fact, as I've said many times, queerness is not an identity, but it's the dismantling of identities. It can never be an identity, but could only disturb an identity. So to that extent, what I understand queerness to function as is first and foremost a figure. And it's important to say a few words about what I mean by a figure. If the political institutions that are fighting for the child, indeed, if the political institutions that have constructed the image and ideology of the child are bound up with what I've been calling reproductive futurism, it's important to see that, first of all, what we have called the symbol of the child is actually a figure. It's a figure insofar as it stands for something else. It doesn't stand for children per se. It stands ultimately for the idea of the state in its collective unity and for the idea of the meaning that the state in its collective unity perpetuates. If figure then is always something that takes the place of or stands in for something else, queerness too is a figure. Queerness is not an affirmative or positive condition that is produced by the individuals who may be defined or define themselves as queer. Queerness is always a diacritical function that stands in opposition to what a collective articulates as the rules of its existence.
Okay. So to make it a little bit simple, we'll just go to Halpern and we'll say queer is at odds with the normal, the legitimate, the dominant. This is what they mean by normativity. Queer does not have a fixed definition. This is why society will never, in the minds of queer activists, be fully queer, because queer does not have a fixed definition. Queer is an oppositional definition. It is a relational definition. If this is normal, then this is queer. If normal comes up here, then queer comes up here. If normal comes down here, then queer comes down here. It is what is ever that is opposition to the normal. Does everyone understand that? When they say normal, they mean the norms that uphold capitalism. I'm going to beat into your head to say capitalism. It is not about normalcy as you understand it. It is about specifically the norms that uphold capitalism. The gender binary upholds capitalism. The nuclear family upholds capitalism. Identity categories uphold capitalism. Capitalism to the left is not just an economic model, it is a cultural model. That's why gender and the family and all these other things are involved, because it is the culture of capitalism. Okay? If you have questions about that, please let me know. Let's continue.
Hence, queerness is always what is outside a structure of norms. It may well, and in many cases,
No. You're not listening. Your listening really sucks. They associate capitalism with normalcy. No. That's not what I just said. When they say normativity, they explicitly and exclusively mean capitalism. Normalcy is not the foundation for capitalism. No, you're not listening. When they say normativity, they mean capitalism. They are the same. They're not related. They're not associated. They're not best friends that see each other on the weekends. They're not second cousins. They are the same thing. Normalcy, as you're saying it, which is not even the correct word, by the way. The correct word is normativity. Normativity means capitalism. The norms that uphold capitalism. The cultural norms that reproduce capitalism. He is talking about reproductive futurity. He's talking about social reproduction theory, is what he's really talking about. He's just given it another name for something that means exactly the same thing. This is about the norms, the traditions, the structures of society that reproduce our current societal structure. That is what that means, explicitly. Let's go back and listen to him again.
In for something else. Queerness, too, is a figure. Queerness is not an affirmative or positive condition that is produced by the individuals who may be defined or define themselves as queer. Queerness is always a diacritical function that stands in opposition to what a collective articulates as the rules of its existence. Hence, queerness is always what is outside a structure of norms. It may well, and in many cases will be, it may well be, and in many cases is, defined in relation to or stigmatized in relation to deviations from sexual norms. But sexual norms aren't the only norms through which queerness can be articulated. In modern culture, queerness has been redefined by those who had previously been stigmatized by it.
Hey, Glomez, can you just fucking pipe it down? I know, Tom, I know who he is, okay? He's been around. Can you, Glomez, we are listening to something very complicated. You're shitposting in the chat. I yelled at other people earlier for doing this. Don't shitpost in the chat. I need you to listen right now. Thank you.
Modern culture, queerness has been redefined by those who had previously been stigmatized by it as a positive identity. And to that extent, it comes to proclaim the possibility of owning as an identity what had previously been merely a stigmatized condition. To that extent, we have to realize that those who are identifying themselves as queer or claiming that identity are ignoring or negating or obscuring its fully figural condition, which is to say, no one is a queer. No one is a queer except insofar as a culture has first stigmatized certain conditions as threats to its normativity. One can then
Okay, so what he's saying is nothing is inherently queer. It's just that when you say something is normal, like gender, and someone exists outside of that perception of normal, which is they say, I am a gender fluid, non-binary fairy, which is actually a real thing on the left. That person who says they are a gender fluid, non-binary fairy exists in opposition to the normal, and therefore it becomes queer. Not that that person is inherently queer by just virtue of existing. They became queer because they existed outside the normal.
identify with that position of threat, but one is only a threat insofar as the norm conceives one as a threat. So if you ask me then, what is queerness? The first thing I would say is that queerness is not. It's not an ontological condition. It's not a condition of being. It's a condition of representing. And what it represents is variable. What is queer today will not necessarily be queer tomorrow. Indeed,
that is why there will never be a queer society. Again, he just said it. What's queer, just because something is queer today doesn't mean it'll be queer tomorrow. Because if the norms of society change, then the definition of queer is going to change. Right now, queer is in opposition to capitalism because capitalism is the normative society. So if they overthrow capitalism and get their Marxist utopia, which is what they're trying to do, will it then be a queer society? No, because the norms are going to change and therefore the definition of queer is going to change. Conceivably, if the queer Marxists win someday, and I think that they probably will, but I think if they win, conceivably there could be a day where capitalism becomes queer. Conceivably. I mean, we're talking about a really long, but yes, exactly. In the event that they got their total and complete socialist utopia and everyone is their best, flamboyant self and no one has a gender and all this stuff, all of a sudden, opposition to that is going to become queer, according to this guy. But that's not what we're dealing with right now, and I want to be really clear about that. There is no circumstance in which capitalism will become the new queer until there is a fully queer Marxist society, and I don't think we should try to do that. I don't think that's a good idea. So,
origins of queer theory and queer thinking mark a differentiation from what preceded them, which was a discipline within the academy that was called gay and lesbian studies. The movement from the one to the other, from gay and lesbian studies to queer, is a movement that recognizes, first of all, that gay and lesbian studies, sexuality studies, don't encompass the entirety of queerness, but also that recognizes, and we have increasingly seen this happen throughout the certain classes of persons in certain largely urban areas in certain so-called Western democracies, that even lesbian and gay lives no longer necessarily coincide with what is conceptualized as queer. That the idea of, for instance, gay marriage has been normalized in many Western societies now, and to that extent is not in itself necessarily seen as being queer.
Queer Marxists oppose gay marriage because marriage is assimilationist to capital norms and the nuclear family, and therefore, ergo, it is not queer, and that is why queer Marxists oppose gay marriage, and they always have. He's also basically, when he's talking about lesbians and gays not being queer, he's talking about homonormativity. This is what I've always told you guys. Where like there was a splinter in the gay activist movement that happened in like the 2000s, where you had I'm going to call them the normal gays. I know not everyone agrees with that, but that's just what I'm going to use. You had the normal gay activists that are just like, we literally just want to get married and be able to visit our loved ones in the hospital. That's like all we want, and get insurance. And that was like all they wanted. Those are the normal gays, okay? All they wanted was gay marriage. Then you had the queer Marxists over here that were like, we don't want gay marriage. We don't want to assimilate to capitalist culture. We don't want to be in this form of propertied relationship. Fuck you guys. The queer Marxists in the mid-2000s were fighting the liberal gay marriage advocates more than they were fighting the conservatives. And I've documented all this, and we're going to talk about a lot of this during Queer Marxism Month. So you had the normal gays who just want a gay marriage. That's homonormative. That's, to queer Marxists, that means homonormativity, the gays assimilating to the norms of the straights, marriage being the institution that upholds capitalism through the nuclear family. And then you have the queer Marxists who are like, fuck all you guys, burn it down.
That doesn't mean that queerness has itself been normalized. It just means that the locus of queerness has, for many in those societies, moved somewhere else. So now what will be stigmatized as queer may be trans lives, which is in the US now the primary route through which the opposition to non-normativity is being articulated.
Well, yeah, because a lot of queer people are identifying as trans, as in transform or transcend gender, not as in transition, transform, or transcend, which is a different thing. I talked about that on the podcast earlier today. You can find that at karlyn.substack.com. Rottweiler says that's actually a good way to separate progressives from queer activists. Ask if they support same-sex marriage. Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Well, I think even Democratic Socialists of America might still support same-sex marriage, though. It really is only the most far-left radical queer activists that don't support gay marriage. But they don't support any marriage, to be fair. Like, the most radical activists believe that marriage is a form of property relationships. It's not even just the queer Marxists. It's like the most radicalized people. The queer Marxists, it's just one of their primary issues. But that is actually a really good point.
Queerness, then, is a condition by which one is stigmatized by a normative culture and produced as an entity through the figuralization.
Yeah, this is actually correct. I want to highlight this. Matt Walsh plays right into the queer Marxist playbook. Every single time Matt Walsh says, what is a woman? He plays into the queer Marxist playbook. Every time people advocate for the I guess like abolition or repeal of gay marriage, they play right into the queer Marxist playbook. Congratulations, conservatives. You don't know your enemy. Congratulations.
In your person of a threat to the perpetuation of normative meaning.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that queerness is anti-life?
Ooh.
Well, I would not say queerness is anti-life, because that would presuppose that there were a clear sense of queerness as an ontological condition that could be one thing or another. But what I would say is that queerness is always perceived as anti-life by those who occupy the position of the norm. The reason that queerness is stigmatized is because it is construed as anti-life. That doesn't mean that those who are stigmatized as queer need be anti-life, but what they are seen as being is opposed to the perpetuation of the structures by which the value of life for the normative figure in a given social order is constructed. Thus, is the queer anti-life? Sometimes they might be. One could certainly say that some avowed queers are opposed to the imperative that life be lived according to the set terms of the dominant order. But does that mean that they're anti-life? For the most part, those who are stigmatized as queer are not anti-life.
In the book, you also talk about another term that I think is very central to what you explore there, symptomosexuality.
Oh,
Could you
gosh.
explain it?
Yes, explain.
That's an open question as to whether I can explain it, but I can certainly try. In order to do so, we have to, again, take a few steps backwards. So this is a word that is a neologism, obviously.
A
And it's
neologism? What
constructed
the fuck?
of two different terms from two different traditions. So on the one hand, you have the term symptôme, which is a term that was introduced by the psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan.
Oh, it's psychoanalysis?
To describe an aspect of the human subject. Now, to understand this aspect of the human subject, we have to go back to a word I used before, which was jouissance, or enjoyment. For Lacan,
It said Jewish in the subtitles. He did not just say Jewish, he said Jewish sans.
Lacanian psychoanalysis, the subject is always a divided subject. Divided, as psychoanalysis always insists, between the conscious and the unconscious, but divided also, therefore, between desire and drive. We are desiring subjects insofar as we are conscious of the objects of our desire. But we are also subjects who are, as unconscious subjects, shaped by the drive of which we are unconscious, which impels us to enact behaviors that often are at odds with what we claim we desire. So we all know those people who say things like, I don't know why the people I wind up with always do X. And one is always tempted to say to them, well, maybe it's because despite what you say, you're actually always seeking out people who do X. Now, consciously, the person is going to say something like, well, of course not. The reason these relationships always end is because I can't stand people who do X. But the reason that those relationships have begun is also, of course, because they are drawn to people who do X. So the tension between those two things makes clear that the drive, which is leading us in Lacanian parlance toward jouissance, to enjoyment, to an experience which is not pleasure per se, but is an excess of experiential intensity, which is beyond pleasure and constitutes the site where pleasure and pain become indistinguishable. That jouissance can be seen in miniature in the way in which
Is this why they're into BDSM? The site where pleasure and pain becomes indistinguishable? Well, no, they're into BDSM because it's consensual power play. It's like it's acting out the dynamics of capitalism consensually, but that sounded very BDSM-y to me, honestly.
person who keeps repeating the same history of bad erotic choices is in fact simultaneously attempting to realize desire and drive in the same object and finding the incompatibility of those two things. With that as just a sort of basis to understand what we can then go on to talk about as the symptôme, Lacan says the symptôme is the structure by which each of us as a subject is impelled toward a particular form of jouissance. What is it, Lacan asks, that determines what we get off on? Why is it that going to a rock concert can induce ecstasy in certain people that is analogous to, and in some ways, as Slavoj Žižek would argue, to some extent even indistinguishable from the ecstasies that you might see other people experiencing in when they start talking in tongues in an evangelical church service? which is then itself analogous to the way some people in a mob scene or in a crowd which is moved to frenzied riots then lose control of themselves and just give way to primal emotions and experiences. For Lacan, all of these different ways of experiencing enjoyment, of experiencing that moment where you exceed yourself, where you experience what in Greek would be termed ecstasy, an ekstasis, a movement beyond one's own being. All of
Orgasm.
those ways of experiencing enjoyment as a form of movement beyond the distinction between pleasure and pain, or a movement beyond what Freud would call the pleasure principle. All of those are determined by.
Edwina, do you have questions? Because you seem to be just putting like random stuff in the chat sometimes, and that's fine. But if you have questions, it'd probably be better to ask the question.
By a structure within the individual which has no meaning. It's just what Lacan calls the symptôme, the specific way in which each subject is attached to enjoyment, in a certain sense, from the outset. Just the ways in which you express your experience of enjoyment. That symptôme is what undoes us as conscious and willful subjects. It marks the site within each of us of something that is incomprehensible and outside the register of meaning. To that extent, we could say that the symptôme for Lacan is like a psychic fingerprint. If you look at your fingerprint, it has no meaning, but it is allegedly unique to you. It's just a marker of what you are. That's why it can be used in forensic determinations of culpability for crimes. The symptôme, similarly for Lacan, is a fingerprint of sorts, but it's a psychic fingerprint that simply says, you are that. That's what you are, but what you are does not have an explanation that could be reduced to meaning or value. In fact, the symptôme seems to dismantle meaning and value to the extent that it takes the consciousness of the subject out of the picture. It makes us all into, in a certain sense, puppets controlled by forces that are in excess of ourselves. It undoes the fantasy of our own sovereignty. The symptôme then is the locus of non-sovereignty within each of us who thinks of ourselves as a sovereign subject. Symptomosexuality then combines that.
Is he saying, I'm asking people in the chat who are smarter than me about this, and there are only a couple people I'm actually going to accept answers from. Is he saying that the symptôme is individuality, the part of ourselves that sees ourselves as like an individual? Is that what he's saying? The symptôme is individuality? Hang on.
Of ourselves. It undoes the fantasy of our own sovereignty. The symptôme then is the locus of non-sovereignty within each of us who thinks of ourselves as a sovereign subject.
No, the symptôme is the collective. I got that wrong. Strike that, reverse it. The symptôme is the collective. The symptôme is the element of non-sovereignty within individuals who believe they are sovereign. See, and no one in the chat that actually answered that question is the person I would have accepted a criticism from on that one. Just to let you guys know. And you all got it wrong, and that is why I said I'm not going to accept answers from just anyone. There are a couple people I wanted to hear from. No. So what he's saying is the actual opposite. Hang on.
Forces that are in excess of ourselves. It undoes the fantasy of our own sovereignty. The Santome then is
it undoes the fantasy of our own sovereignty. Hang on. What is he referring to?
have an explanation that could be reduced to meaning
I
or
fucking
value.
hate psychoanalysis.
In fact, the Santome seems to dismantle meaning and value to the extent that it takes the consciousness of the subject out of the picture. It makes us all into, in a certain sense, puppets controlled by forces that are in excess of ourselves. It undoes the fantasy of our own sovereignty. The Santome then is the
Santome undoes the fantasy of our own sovereignty.
locus of non-sovereignty within each of us who thinks
It's the locus of non-sovereignty within each of us
of ourselves as a sovereign subject.
It's the non-locus of control within all of us that, hang on, I just messed that up royally, but we all consider ourselves to be a sovereign subject. The Santon is the thing that says you are not sovereign. Okay. I think I get it. Yeah, it's like the ego. All right, so now Edwina, I'm going to assume that you have nothing of value to add. I'm going to ban you. I think you're our little trolley friend. Nice work there, but you still are getting banned. Goodbye.
Santomosexuality then combines that lack of meaning and that non-sovereignty with sexuality to see that sexualities that are seen as not conforming to the production or the reproduction of meaning, and thus not conforming to the production or the reproduction of the established social order,
Capitalism
will be identified as santomosexualities, and thus
Yo!
as threats to the perpetuation of that social order.
Okay, I get it now. I get it now what he was saying. Santome sexualities is sexuality that doesn't uphold normativity or capitalism. I got it. Okay, I'm tracking. Again.
To the production or the reproduction of meaning.
I need to go back a little bit further. Okay. When he says the reproduction, okay, so again, he's talking about social reproduction theory. Social reproduction theory is the idea that social systems will reproduce themselves until they're disrupted. Applied to the nuclear family will reproduce capitalism until it's disrupted. That's what they believe. He's saying that Santome sexualities are sexualities that do not contribute to the social reproduction of capitalism. And I'm seeing a lot of people in the chat who I don't think are listening right now because they're shitposting Tom. So I think that's what he's saying. Listen again.
Sexualities that are seen as not conforming to the production or the reproduction of meaning, and thus not conforming to the production or the reproduction of the established social order, will be
the established social order means capitalism. So Santon sexualities are sexualities that are not contributing to the social reproduction of capitalism. That means they are outside of the nuclear family. That is what queer is. Again.
Santomosexuality then combines that lack of meaning and that non-sovereignty with sexuality to see that sexualities that are seen as not conforming to the production or the reproduction of meaning, and thus not conforming to the production or the reproduction of the established social order, will be identified as santomosexualities, and thus as threats to the perpetuation of that social order, and become figures for what I would say is the sexuality within sexuality itself. And to explain what I mean by that, just a very quick coda. Santomosexualities bear the burden of sexualization. An example. In Florida, in the United States, it has recently become illegal to
No.
talk about sexual orientation or sexual identities or sexualities in grades kindergarten through third grade, and then only in age-appropriate ways, whatever that means, in subsequent grades. This is the so-called Don't Say Gay bill that has been passed in the state of Florida in 2022. Now, the thing to understand about this is that to identify oneself as, let's say, a gay man, a lesbian, a bisexual, is ipso facto to be seen as introducing
So
sexuality
facto.
and sex into the classroom in a way that introducing yourself as Mr. Smith married to Mrs. Smith is not seen as introducing sex or sexuality into the classroom. To be a heterosexual, or even to be as heterosexuals who have decided to reproduce are often said to be trying to have a baby, is not seen as engaging in sexuality in the overt form. It is seen rather as conducing to socially validated or valorized ends. Whereas simply to articulate one's being, regardless of one's doing, as a lesbian, bisexual, gay man, trans person, is to be seen as sexualizing discourse. Thus, santomosexuality bears the stigma of sexuality itself in order to purge heterosexuality of its implication in the sexual.
Mm-hmm. What is it that in the book you call a culture of death?
Well, I don't refer to a culture of death directly. I talk about the fact that the Catholic Church had identified, especially before Pope Francis, various forms of modern life as perpetuating a culture of death. So for those aspects of the church and of the Catholic Church, and for many in Protestant fundamentalist churches, and for many conservative, reactionary, or authoritarian politicians around the globe, including Trump in the US, Putin in Russia, Orban in Hungary, one could go on and on, the association of modernism in the West and of expanded rights and opportunities for women, for those who identify as part of the so-called LGBTQIAA+ community, is seen as promulgating a culture of death insofar as it establishes the possibility of experiencing a life outside of the norms of reproductive futurism. Hence, anything that does not conduce to the primacy and value as the ultimate value of social organization, of reproductive futurism, is condemned as a culture of death, including, therefore, reproductive freedoms for women, including sexual opportunities, including for sexual minorities, including the extension of the rights to marriage and to equal social benefits to those who identify as queer. All of those things promulgate a culture of death to the extent that they represent the possibility of the undoing of the structures of meaning by which the entrenched order has established its own horizon of value.
Mm-hmm. With what we've been talking about in mind, where would you say political movements against homosexuality stem from?
Well, I think they stem from the same roots that all resistance to non-normative logics stem. And that is the anxiety about the porousness, the vulnerability of the structures by which a collectivity can recognize itself. So that the question of homosexuality, for instance, in particular, has always been legible as a question of how a community can perpetuate its strength as a coherent entity if it is at the same time engaging in practices that figure the penetration, in particular, of the male body, and thus the undoing of the male body's coherence, which is in and of itself the figure of the coherence of the state. In other words, we have to recognize, as I'm sure you and your listeners do, that attitudes toward homosexuality and laws about homosexuality vary widely historically. It's not as if there is some a priori intrinsic repugnance from or reaction against homosexuality. But as soon as there is a social collectivity, even in those cultures like that are famously described or evoked by moderns as cultures of homosexuality, homosexuality was seen as, which is to say same-sex sexual relations, because homosexuality, as Foucault reminds us, is itself a conceptual product of the 19th century. But same-sex sexual relations in those so-called cultures of homosexuality were always only seen as intensified bonds of relation between men that supplemented heterosexual reproduction, and that were proper only between men who had reached adulthood and young boys prior to the arrival of those boys at adulthood. So it wasn't actually same-sex sexuality, insofar as what one could say that in those cultures, childhood was not sexed as male or female. There were boys and there were girls, but the puer was not a man, and thus the conceptualization of sex between an adult man and the puer was not, in a certain sense, a same-sex relationship, so much as it was a man-boy relationship.
I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole.
In contemporary society,
not doing it,
is to raise the specter of the most resolutely queered of all sexual positions, pedophilia, which has occupied now for some time the terrain of that which one cannot even talk about without risking stigmatization.
He had to. I knew it. I knew this guy was going to do this. I fucking knew this guy was going to do this. Is this Yale professor actually arguing for the destigmatization of pedophilia? Now listen, I've said this a million times. The primary goal of queer theory is to abolish the gender binary and the nuclear family. But I said at the beginning, I thought this guy was going to say something wacky concerning kids because that's his whole philosophical model. This is not something that we commonly hear in queer presentations, okay? It's just not. And I really want to make sure it's very clear. Because we need to be able to look at queer for what it is without hysteria. Now, people should rightfully get hysterical when children are actually being sexualized. I'm not suggesting I think the sexualization of kids is good. I don't. I think people should cut that shit out. And I think people should always be diligent about that. I just really want to make sure, because we're going to rewind and we're going to listen to it again. I just really want to make sure people understand This is not something that we usually hear in queer theory. It's just not. But it does pop up every now and again. And then these clips take over all other study of queer theory because they're that offensive. Okay? So we're going to listen to it again and we're going to view it for what it is, because I didn't make this guy talk about pedophilia in an interview, even though he's a Yale professor. All right.
In a certain sense, a same-sex relationship, so much as it was a man-boy relationship. That, of course, in contemporary society, is to raise the specter of the most resolutely queered of all sexual positions, pedophilia, which has occupied now for some time the terrain of that which one cannot even talk about without risking stigmatization.
Mm-hmm. And with what we've talked about concerning the concept of the child with a capital C and reproductive futurism,
I want to
how
go back and
would
listen to that
that
again.
apply to...
Hang on. I want to go back and listen to that section again so I really understand exactly what this guy's argument is. And then we're going to let it go.
By moderns as cultures of homosexuality. Homosexuality was seen as, which is to say same-sex sexual relations, because homosexuality, as Foucault reminds us, is itself a conceptual product of the 19th century. But same-sex sexual relations in those so-called cultures of homosexuality were always only seen as intensified bonds of relation between men that supplemented heterosexual reproduction, and that were proper only between men who had reached adulthood and young boys prior to the arrival of those boys at adulthood. So it wasn't actually same-sex sexuality, insofar as what one could say that in those cultures, childhood was not sexed as male or female. There were boys and there were girls, but the puer was not a man. And thus the conceptualization of sex between an adult man and the puer was not, in a certain sense, a same-sex relationship, so much as it was a man-boy relationship. That, of course, in contemporary society, is to raise the specter of the most resolutely queered of all sexual positions, pedophilia, which has occupied now for some time the terrain of that which one cannot even talk about without risking stigmatization.
Mm-hmm. And with what we've talked about concerning the concept of the child with a capital C and reproductive futurism, how would that apply to anti-abortion movements?
Well, as we've seen, the anxiety about threats to the integrity, the boundaries of, the coherence of a social order means that the protection, the defense of that polity is first and foremost a defense of its ways of conceptualizing value. Now, it is by no means the case that one cannot produce an ethical, value-laden argument for reproductive freedom. And indeed, that's precisely what the proponents of reproductive freedom have done. And that indeed is one of the reasons why, even in this answer to your question, when I say the word reproductive freedom, what we do is move away from the word abortion, because reproductive freedom sublimates the reality that abortion is an act that entails a certain degree of conceptual violence.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the anti-abortion movement is a movement that largely opposes abortion for religious reasons. And it is important to recognize, as Lacan points out, that meaning is fundamentally a religious concept. In other words,
What?
to ascribe meaning to the world is always to construct the basis for a theology, even if it's only a secular theology.
I don't know about that, bro.
Every form of understanding the world is a way of constructing a frame that totalizes that world within the logic of a meaning. So when we say that the anti-abortion movement is largely a religious movement, the important thing to recognize is that even when it purports not to come from established, or not to be based in the tenets of established religions, it is still a movement whose religion is the meaning of the child as the figure of life itself. And thus, the prohibition on the termination of even a potential life is cognate with the prohibition on the termination of the meaning of life in a social order. Now, the irony, as many people have pointed out, is that concern for that potential life for many in the anti-abortion movement seems to end with birth, so that once the child is actually born, its value in terms of, say, providing it with safety from police violence, or providing it with nurture that will allow it to live, or providing it with the circumstances to keep it from succumbing to poverty, all of those things cease to matter once the child is born to many, because at that point, the child has free will and agency, is a sovereign subject. The anti-abortion movement is so invested in the fetus because the fetus is the exemplar of a subject who lacks the sovereignty to control its own destiny. And thus it becomes the figure of potential sovereignty in the face of actual non-sovereignty.
This is so overly
now, what's
complicated.
important about that is that potential sovereignty is what drives the social order itself. None of us ever have sovereignty. All of us are constantly in any collective, as also in our status as psychic subjects, experiencing the division between sovereignty and non-sovereignty. But the ideal is to attain to that position of agential power, and thus to overcome the constraint of limitation, of what in religious or theological discourse would be called nature, in order to become wholly the spirit. To that extent, reproductive futurism is a version of religion too, and its salvific figure, its savior, is the child, as it is in Christian religions as well, the child that can, especially in the form of the fetus, represent it as pure potential, unadulterated, unmarked, untainted by the reality of succumbing to nature, and undiminished by the reality of the choices that it will make once it's born.
Mm-hmm. So one last question. Does your work, and particularly the topics you explore in this book, No Future, connect in any way to anti-natalism?
Well, it could, but it needn't, which is to say, antinatalism is in and of itself a movement that promulgates a vision of a social order that is predicated on a system of values. And thus its imperative is to articulate a sort of ideal, both ethical and political, by which human lives should be regulated. To that extent, it presupposes its own place within the political order as just another political voice that is saying that this is the best way to shape a society. So even if you go back and, and Lacan talks about this in the Ethics of Psychoanalysis, he talks about a sort of very early antinatalist society, the Cathars, who believed that reproduction was evil. And there are periodically through time, there are religious communities that
Shakers
decide that in order to purify themselves of their implication in a fallen nature, they must avoid the reproduction of that fallen nature. But that antinatalism does not escape by any means the religious imperative toward meaning that is invested in reproductive futurism. It simply transforms it into a wholly spiritual practice, or in the case of other non-religious antinatalist movements, into a wholly ethical practice. For me, the grounds of religion and the grounds of ethics must be equally interrogated. We are constrained as subjects living within a political structure to act ethically with relation to each other. But no one can ever articulate a ground for ethics, a ground by which an ethical possibility will coincide with the reality of human possibility. So that Lacan famously has a passage in which he talks about, precisely insofar as we are divided subjects, the impossibility of ever satisfying our desire and our drive at the same time. Precisely because what we want is antithetical. We want, as subjects of desire, what may be antithetical to what we unconsciously want as subjects of the drive. Hence, how do we act ethically? How do we do justice? When to do justice would have to mean satisfying those demands that are perpetually in conflict, demands that we act ethically toward subjects that are in conflict with themselves. That's the conflict that ethics proposes, and that's why a queer position, if it could be articulated, would not be a political position that is trying to establish a new society or a better foundation for that society. The queer position is always going to be the position that is, to go back to the title of your podcast, the dissenter's position. It's going to be the one that dissents from every social structure, precisely because it speaks for and as that which the social structure cannot accommodate. That's why in the book that is finally coming out at the end of this year as the follow-up to No Future, Bad Education, what I argue is that every social order exists to exclude from thinkability what we could articulate as nothing, the nothingness, the space of what is reduced to nothing because it can't be seen, articulated, or recognized by the society as it exists. I mean, we talk readily today, for instance, about trans children or trans adults. But 200 years ago, that phrase would not have meant anything. And the person in Western society who felt themselves not to be properly gendered at birth would not be recognizable except perhaps as an effeminate man or as a butch woman who would then be slotted into categories of sexual deviance rather than gender deviance per se. All sorts of categories of possible lives are unrecognized by us at this very moment. They are the nothing in the midst of our society. They are the queers who have no names, who will gain names in time to come, and as they gain names will gain identities, and then will think of themselves as ontological positions instead of as diacritical possibilities.
Wow, this is
The
so
nothing
crazy.
is the place of the queer. The queer is on the side of the nothing, and it's not on the side of founding a society in which the rights of nothing will be protected, because we can't
Saying that queer is inherently nihilistic.
as they gain names, will gain identities, and then will think of themselves as ontological positions instead of as diacritical possibilities. The nothing is the place of the queer. The queer is on the side of the nothing. And it's not on the side of founding a society in which the rights of nothing will be protected, because we can't protect the rights of those that are not yet identifiable. Thus, there is no structure that will accommodate queerness. Queerness is what instead structurally resists the integrity of every structure. It's the internal discontinuity of every political structure that insists not on founding an alternative structure, but on recognizing the necessity of dissolving the one we have.
Mm-hmm. Great. So the book is again No Future, Queer Theory and the Death Drive. I will be leaving a link to it in the description box of the interview. Apart from the book, Dr. Edelman, would you like to mention any places on the internet where people can find your work?
Well, I'm not one for social media. I don't have a website. The Bad Education, the new book, is coming out from Duke University Press. There are probably other sites that deal with my work, but I don't check them out, so I can't be of help there.
Okay, no problem at all. I will be leaving some
All
links
right.
at least to your faculty page and to the rest of your book. So, Dr. Edelman, thank you so much for taking the time to.
All right, that ends up. I think we had some great clips from the presentation. It was a little bit heady. I'm going to be honest. It was a little bit heady, because he's a philosopher. But it was also internally consistent with everything that we've heard queer Marxists say, queer activists say, and it's consistent with what we cover in Counter-Revolutionary Book Club. So I'm just going to assume that there's nothing really like super groundbreaking other than getting, a Yale. Well, he's at Tufts now, I guess. He's not Yale anymore, it's Tufts. Getting a Tufts faculty member talking about pedophilia or whatever. Anyway, so that is what we have for today, guys. That's going to wrap us up for this episode of Queer Marxism Month. We will be covering queer Marxism all month long on the channel. I do want to remind people, though, that we are not doing a community supporter call tonight because we are doing a spy stream tonight, ladies and gentlemen. It is a spy stream kind of night. In around about 10 minutes, I will be starting up spy stream. If you are a member of my main Substack, that is Karlyn, Karlyn, .substack.com. If you are a member of my Patreon, if you are a member of my locals, if you are a supporter on Twitter or a YouTube channel member, then you can come and join us for spy stream in just a little bit. What we're going to be doing is we are going to be going inside a live leftist activist training. I just dropped the link for the Substack in the chat, but if you're a member on a different platform, you can go and find the link there. And we're going to watch it and we're going to talk about it. And that's going to get started in around about 10 minutes. And so I'm going to go take a little break. I'm going to end this stream. I'm going to set up the next stream and I will see you guys there. And if you're new to my work, I hope you come back. We're going to be covering queer Marxist content all month long on the channel. I stream Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern time. We do Saturdays at 6 p.m. for Socialism Saturday. And I will show you the craziest stuff on the internet that no one else is showing you. And you'll hate it and you'll love it at the same time. And it's crazy. All right, guys, that's all we have for today. I will see you in a little bit for Spy Stream, or I'll see you tomorrow on the channel. Take care, guys. We'll see you soon. Bye.
How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer. people dislike me because I am not completely like them.
I'm not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.